Hey, what's up, guys? Today is the last, the closing arguments on the question of whether that has been on the minds of many since February of last year, and that is whether prosecutors can use the trial accounts of Abd al-Rahim Abdul al-Nashiri, who was suspected of being the mastermind of the USS Cole bombing, and whether prosecutors can use his trial accounts, which came from torture in Guantanamo in early 2007. Now, per the account of Cal Rosenberg of the New York Times, who's been the most prolific and consistent stream of updated information regarding out of Guantanamo, she states that she's in court right now, and prosecutor Ed Ryan is arguing that defendant Abdullah Rahim al-Nashiri did make a voluntary inculpatory statement about his role in the sneak attack bombing of the USS Cole, and to the so-called clean team of federal officers in early 2007 at Guantanamo Bay, which is irrelevant. Ryan's argument will go on to say, per the report by Rosenberg, one, the Gitmo interrogations met the Estad factions of a change in time, change in place, change in identity of the questions. Two, Mr. Nashiri was read a rights warning that was crafted for the purpose by a task force that had lawyers. Three, his 2007 interrogations are contained in a 34-page account across 3 days of questioning. He was able to talk to another prisoner during that time. Four, defense lawyers did not have the defendant testify that what he told interrogators 2007 was involuntary. Five, the earlier coerced interrogations were done for intelligence purposes. The 2007 interrogations were done for law enforcement purposes. Six, there are separate remarks, not within the four corners, of which show that the prisoner understood it was a new day, unrelated to before. Now, again, Rosenberg is reporting that the prosecution showed portions of the agent's report of the 3-day interrogation, but it hasn't been released. Fragments from the report sometimes show that Mr. Nashiri's comments in the first person, with the agent saying he called himself Bilal, although without quote marks. So there's a lot going on here in this case, because also the prosecution has videotapes of Guantanamo, of Nashiri at Guantanamo in 2007. However, we're not allowed to see it. The public isn't anyway. All right, military commissions. However, the defendants are getting a classified copy. The judge is allowed to see a classified copy with redactions, but he's not allowed to keep a copy. So again, we have the prosecution, the federal government, withholding all information regarding al-Nashiri and the USS Cole investigation away from the defendants, who are trying to say that whatever Nashiri admitted under torture cannot be used against him because he's actually telling them whatever they want to hear. Now, for those who don't know, Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri is accused of organizing the al-Qaeda bombing of the U.S. Navy destroyer on October 12, 2000, the USS Cole. You had two martyrdom Salafis who sailed a bomb-laden skiff alongside the Cole, which was at the port of Aden during a refueling stop, and this little boat went straight into the hull of the USS Cole, and it blew up, in which 17 sailors died, and a couple, like 60 people were injured. Mr. Nashiri is also accused of a role in the 2002 bombing of the Limburg, which is a French-flagged Malaysian chartered tanker that was carrying crude oil, and a Bulgarian crew member was killed in that attack. And if you go to Carol Rosenberg's trial guide, the Cole bombing case, which I'll link at the bottom of the screen, the case has been in pretrial proceedings since Nashiri's arraignment in November 2011. And that's in part because of higher court challenges by both the prosecution and defense lawyers to make decisions by the case judges, and in part because 2 years of judicial rulings by an earlier judge were thrown out when he was found to have a conflict in the interest. And now this judge is retiring from the U.S. Navy. So much like the 9/11 case, at least we have hearings with this. We don't even have freaking hearings for the 9/11 case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other four that are accused of being behind the plot. At least with the USS Cole, we have a pre-trial hearing. Now, like I said in an earlier video this week, in October of this year, the Southern District of New York, Judge George Daniels is going to make a decision on whether, for the 9/11 victims' families represented by Creedler and Creedler and Motley Rice, whether or not they are allowed to continue their litigation case against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. If Daniels strikes that down, there is no active case in the United States, anywhere in the world. It'll be a big loss because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is being protected under the Foreign Judicial Act or something like that, Securities Act or something like that. I'm saying it wrong, but the United States, the White House, is basically protecting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and their interests by using the Department of Justice to basically not compromise for the defense. And I've interviewed Ken Williams, who was a former FBI agent out of Phoenix, who wrote the Phoenix memo warning the intelligence services about a high number of Islamic militants in flight schools. And it was ignored. But he helped the case for Creedler and Creedler, even though the FBI told him not to help out in the case. This is basically a problem. The case currently for the USS Cole bombing is basically being paused because the prosecution is not helping or not cooperating with the courts by selecting evidence and not giving the full evidence. Giving the judge, not anybody else, the judge, classified copies of information that he can't take with him due to matters of national security. I think that's bullshit. I think what they're doing is basically they have no case because al-Nashiri was tortured, much like with the Guantanamo 5 for 9/11. Even if al-Nashiri told the truth that he was the mastermind of the Cole bombing, it doesn't matter because he was tortured. Now, when a little bit of background on al-Nashiri, because he was captured in the United Arab Emirates in November of 2002. Shortly thereafter, we caught Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shid, but not because of al-Nashiri. He was actually sentenced to death in absentia in a Yemeni court for his role in the USS Cole bombing, which is funny because that decision was made in September of 2004, that the Yemeni government sentenced Nashiri to death before the United States did. Meanwhile, the United States are the victims of such an attack. How did that happen? But much like with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Ammar al-Baluchi, Mustafa al-Hassawi, and Tawfiq bin Attash, Khalad, al-Nashiri, before he was transferred to Guantanamo, he was held at CIA black sites in Thailand, in Poland, for an undetermined amount of time. We don't have records. CIA destroyed a lot of these records. Even the CIA said that al-Nashiri was mentally incapable of carrying out this plot. And I'll quote you from an article from the Washington Post in 2014 called The Hidden History of the CIA's Prison in Poland. One CIA official said of al-Nashiri, quote, "He was an idiot. He couldn't read or comprehend a comic book," end quote. That's the CIA. So, if the CIA is torturing Nashiri for information, find out he's an idiot. Send that information to the White House. White House then sends that information to the prosecutors at Guantanamo. Guantanamo basically says he's the mastermind of the Cole bombing. Meanwhile, they tortured this guy. Even if he was the mastermind, the CIA disagrees, thinking that he's too stupid, inept to carry out such an elaborate plot. Yet that evidence is going to be used against him in the court of law. This is the reason why the prosecution are basically showing redacted information, because it basically will help al-Nashiri in this case. One, because he was tortured. Two, he's mentally inept, coming from the very people who tortured him. Now, the Combat Status Review, which is the tribunal for people held at Guantanamo, whether they're going to be dangerous or not, and go back in 2007, the Department of Defense wrote a 14-page. I'm sorry. They had wrote a report about 14 high-value detainees who have been transferred to Guantanamo from CIA black sites, and they were labeled enemy combatants. Now, remember what I said in the last video. The Department of Justice before 9/11 was the institution that was granted the authority to label somebody an enemy combatant. That right was taken away from in November of 2001 by Vice President Dick Cheney, although authorized by President Bush, in which he allowed lawyers like John Yoo and David Addington to basically rewrite laws circumventing federal statutes and also eliminating the Geneva Convention for foreign captives, saying that because these are enemies and not U.S. citizens, they're not granted the rights of Americans. They should not be protected under the Geneva Convention. We should actually circumvent these laws. And so now these laws are basically where the White House now has the authority to label who's an enemy combatant, not the Department of Justice, which is the reason why you had a lot of pushback from the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, John Ashcroft and Colin Powell, who weren't involved with the writing of this legislation. And so now the White House can label anybody a terrorist. And that definition is very vague. So the Combatant Status Review Tribunal under Peter Brownback and Keith Alfred in 2007, they ruled 2 months early that only illegal enemy combatants could face military commissions. And the Department of Defense waived the qualifier and said that all 14 men could now face charges before Guantanamo military commissions. So in other words, the tribunal said these have to be not just enemy combatants, but illegal enemy combatants. So the Department of Defense basically circumvented that and said these are illegal enemy combatants. And when al-Nashiri was in these CIA black sites, he was, and this came out in a 2007 military tribunal hearing, where he confessed to his involvement in the USS Cole bombing, the rocket attacks in Saudi Arabia in 2007, the French merchant vessel Limburg incident I talked about, the plan to bomb American ships in the Gulf, plan to hijack a plane and crash it into a ship, Osama bin Laden having a nuclear bomb, and relationship with people committing bombings in Saudi Arabia, militants, Salafi militants. The whole shebang. In other words, he gave them exactly what they wanted to hear. Now, I've interviewed one detainee who was held in Guantanamo for 16 years, Mohammed al-Slahi, who they said was a part of 9/11 attacks because he met with Ramzi bin al-Shibh in Germany. He did, but he didn't know who he was. Didn't even know him for the full day. Anyway, they tortured him terribly. And they released him because they had no evidence against him. Not a sorry either. And al-Nashiri listed 7 false confessions, and those are the 7 confessions I just named. And this wouldn't be a shock to you, but supervising the torture of al-Nashiri was none other than the current director of the CIA, Gina Haspel. I'm sorry, she's the former director of the CIA. And later on, to top it off, a Navy Reserve doctor actually physically and mentally evaluated him and said that he is one of the most severely traumatized individuals I have ever seen. And later on, and this is coming from the New York Times dated 2018, entitled Cables Details CIA Waterboarding at Secret Prison Run by Gina Haspel. In August of 2018, cables from a secret detention site overseen by Haspel, dating from November 2002 and likely authorized, if not written by her, I think she authorized it. That's what I think. But they were released. These cables were released under a Freedom of Information lawsuit. And in the cables described the torture of al-Nashiri in detail, including CIA masked men slamming him against the wall, confining him to a small box for days on end, waterboarding him countless times, depriving him of sleep and clothing, full nudity, hanged on a wall with chains, as well as threatening to turn him over to others who would kill him, slapping him, and sexually abusing him while calling him names. And in the cable, they called him a little girl, a spoiled little rich Saudi kid, and a sissy. CIA, up your game. You guys suck at insults. And this came out in the tribunal. And Nashiri's lawyers basically argued, he made these confessions under duress of torture. While he was in Thailand, waterboarded. So in January 2009, an order from U.S. President Obama's administration suspended all Guantanamo military commission hearings for 3 months. And I think this was basically to have a timeout and basically see what they could do next. But that was overruled by military tribunal Judge Army Colonel James Poe in just in Nashiri's case. And on February 5th, 2009, al-Nashiri's charges are all withdrawn without prejudice. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, Nashiri's trial, his charges are reinstated, and this has been at trial. So everything that Cal Rosenberg is reporting now is basically from the trial starting at 2011. And the prosecution also plans to penalize Nashiri if he's found guilty with the death penalty. And this is the reason why. Right now, we have basically the prosecution who are giving the defense and the judges, the courts, redacted information, not everything, because they know there is no case. Much like with 9/11 and those defendants, even if they told the truth, Nashiri made those confessions of the torture. Here's the thing. Why did the CIA torture these people? According to them, basically, according to then Director George Tenet, it was to get information as soon as possible, and it was authorized by the Bush White House. That's true. That's not the question. The question is knowing full well about the history of torture in which the CIA has been guilty and culpable of, knowing that you do not elicit actionable intelligence from torture. Why did they torture him anyway? Let's use, for example, the 9/11 case. If you have bona fide information, signals intelligence, phone calls the NSA had, human intelligence from Saudi Arabia and Israel, from inside the United States, because that's who was spying on the 9/11 hijackers. You had the CIA, the NSA, the Saudis, and the Israelis, with the Israelis having the most operatives all over New York, New Jersey, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas, San Diego, Arizona, using art student rings, moving companies, okay? Following these people on, living nearby these people. And also monitoring the DEA and the FBI in the process. You have Saudis inside the United States because they can actually commiserate with hijackers like Khalid al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi in San Diego. Now, with the Counter-Strel files, we know that the Saudis and CIA were working in tandem, illegally inside the United States. The Israelis, we know that from the Gerald Shea memo, which I'm doing a chapter reading currently. Please watch those. Very important. It's the only document that shows in detail the Israeli operatives following these people. And it's not conspiracy, it's not anti-Semitic. These are going by arrest records from a retired corporate lawyer, Gerald Shea, and from a DEA report, which reported on the illegal art student ring. All this information. What did they collect? Did they collect information that could have prevented 9/11? Why wasn't it shared? Okay, they're gone, Israelis and Saudis. We have left the intelligence services, CIA, NSA. Why didn't the 9/11 Commission of Joint House Inquiry pressure the NSA? What did you listen on those phone calls on bin Laden's satellite phone in the mid-90s? The al-Qaeda communications hub run by Ahmed al-Hada, an associate of bin Laden, who with one of the hijackers was actually living there, Khalid al-Mihdhar. 1996, they were tapping that phone. That's 5 years prior to 9/11. What were they talking about on those phones? What was listened to by the NSA? What did the CIA know? Because they were monitoring that house. Most surveilled house in the world. In the world. From 96 to 2002. Was there information that could have prevented 9/11 from happening? Why wasn't it shared? If not, if they weren't talking about 9/11, well then, who's responsible for 9/11? Is it not Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, and the rest? Who are the additional hijackers that were going to hijack additional planes? Where'd they come from? If the government said it was 19 people ordered by bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who the hell are these people? Where'd they come from? Who are they? Why did we let them go? That's not a conspiracy. I'm not making some of them. It actually happened on September 11th and September 13th. In fact, the only two people I know that report on it were Paul Thompson, the author of the Terror Timeline, and DJ Thermodetonator, who did magnificent films like Jacob Maxim. The only two people I know in the world that report on the additional attempted hijackings. TMZ. Oi, TMZ. Can you believe it? TMZ reported on the additional, the attempted hijacking of Flight 23. Gonyo. Can you believe it? I just stunning. TMZ, a tabloid, a gossip tabloid, reported on one of the biggest stories of 9/11. Nobody else wanted to. ABC, NBC, Fox, right? It's a comedy, and it shouldn't be. And so, I'll wrap it up like this. Look, we really need to put pressure on alt media. We need more voices to come out and say, hey, can we cover the Gerald Shea memo? Can we cover the Canistrell file? Can we cover why the NSA is not releasing information about bin Laden's satellite phones or the house in Yemen? They listened to every single phone call for 6 years, an enormous amount of data. Why did the CIA commit perjury at the 9/11 Commission and Joint House Inquiry? Look, we got to start asking the right questions. Get out of ground zero. My God. At least with these areas I'm talking about today, we can put faces and names to the statements and non-statements made by people and the actions thereof. Illegal. We can hold people accountable before that window is shut forever. But we're not going to get anywhere by saying thermite bombs or Judy Wood space beams or no hijackers or no planes. That is meant as a distraction to keep you from investigating the actual things I'm talking about today here. I think we need to start asking the right questions before it's too late. All right, guys, have a good afternoon. Have a good weekend. I'll probably make a video here and there, of course, to keep you all updated with the latest news and also to give you added information about the September 11 attacks, as always. Happy July 4th. See you in the next video.